NDSU has released a guide specifically for common crops statewide to help farmers during their financial planning. The university's annual projected crop budget is tailored to different regions in the state, and it includes predictions of average market prices, costs for fertilizers, seeds, equipment repairs, payroll, and even estimates for interest on loans. Extension agent Dan Falsky says compared to last year, it looks like fertilizer, chemical, and fuel costs will be a little lower this year.
Whether you're talking purchasing land or cash renting land, it looks like those are continuing to climb. Repairs and interest on operating and investment capital are certainly higher.
They also have a crop comparison tool available per region. These guides are free, and we'll post their links on our website.